In our Node program so far, we've actually been using a few modules as we've written some simple little test programs. You've seen us use the HTTP module, and we've also played around a little bit with the query string and the URL module. In this lesson, we're going to spend a bunch more time clarifying what exactly it is we're doing when we require these modules, and how we can write our own, and what exactly a module is, and sort of learn some more details about it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to start and write our own little trivial little model here. So let's go to short node live lessons, lesson 5, and let's write a little simple little module called greeter. Now in Node, every single file we write is in fact a module. So when we write a simple little JavaScript file, it itself is a module. I have to require other modules using the require function. And some people ask, well, why don't you sort of have free ones that are always included? And the reason for that is Node is a very powerful and flexible environment. I can use whatever I want to do whatever I want with it, and they're not going to sort of pre-burden us with any things that we might not want. So in our, let's actually first write a simple little program here called module.js. Every file I just said is a module, and in fact has a global variable called module, and it is, if I do console.log module, this is the global variable, and there's another one that we're going to use far more often, which is called exports. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to node module.js, and you'll see here that the first thing we printed out was the module global variable, and it tells us a little bit about ourselves. We have, do we have a parent module? It actually has the exports here, which is the exact same thing as the second thing we printed out here in our program, the exports. It has sort of any children modules. Do we have those? It shows you the file name. And then it also shows you the search path. And I'll talk about this in a little minute in the next sublesson when we talk about NPM. So that's the basics of the module. So let's go ahead back to our simple little module here that we're going to write. So the way you work with modules, or the way I create a module to consume in another program, is I use the exports and I hang functions off of them. So let's create a little function called hello world, and we'll make it a function that takes a language like that, and we'll say if language, let's make it lang because it's just shorter to type, equals en, return hello world, else if lang equals fr, return bonjour tout le monde, else if lang, okay, we're kind of wasting time here on silly languages, return buongiorno a tutti. Otherwise, we don't speak that language. Like that. Okay. So let's also let's also have another function here called exports.goodbye. And we'll say that's a function that takes a language, and we'll cut and paste that. Bye. Au revoir and ciao. And then boo. Okay, so that's actually the basics of a module. It's very common also that you'll include a little version number here at the top of it. So we'll call this version 0.1.0 because it's pretty basic and doesn't do very much yet. So let's write a little tester program to test our module. And whereas before we've seen us do this, we would do require HTTP, and we would just say look for HTTP in some sort of global namespace for HTTP. What we're going to do now is we're actually going to use the greeter module, and we actually need to sort of tell Node a little bit more about where it is. So I'm actually going to say it's in the current directory as something called greeter. That I can add the .js or not. If I don't, Node will look for that for us. Now what I can do is I can say console.log greeter.hello world. I can just call these functions off of this module as if it was sort of any other module that I'd have included. And then I also want to say greeter.goodbye. And let's do that in French because I'm feeling very... Okay. So Now I should be able to say node test.js, and you see that we called the hello world on it, and then the au revoir on it, the goodbye, and that all works just fine. So that's really the basics of writing modules. You can very trivially create libraries of functions and then include them wherever you want within our program. Let's say in my program I have test.js using the greeter module, and then I actually create another file called test2.js that also uses the greeter module. You might be asking yourself, are these actually sort of separate instances of the module, or are they the same instance of it? And the answer is, since it's the exact same module in the same file, Node will actually use the same one. In the next section on NPM, we'll show you when that might actually be slightly different. But for this simple case where everybody's loading from the exact same file, it is indeed the same sort of instance of this greeter module. So let's go back to our greeter here. And I mean, libraries of functions are pretty cool, but they're pretty old school. I might want to actually add a class or some object-oriented programming to my application. So let's write a class here called greeter, and it takes a language, and then it says this.language equals that language, and then we'll expose a function on it called greet. And that will be a function that, let's do this. Let's cheat and use some of the code we've already written. And then we'll replace lang with this.language like that. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to greet them. I'm going to have a little class that greets them, and then that class, you give the language to it, and then it can still do the same thing. And then, you know, I'm hoping that my basic use will be something like greeter dot, you know, var g equals new greeter, say en, and then I could just say greet g.greet like that. So that's kind of what I want to be able to do. Okay, so now I have this new class in my greeter module, and I need to figure out how to use it in my script. So there are two key ways of doing this, and the way I'm going to show you first is called the factory model. And the way you do that is you expose a function on the module to create an instance of this. So I'm going to say I'm going to create a function here called createGreeter, and this will take a language, and what it will do is it will return a new instance of the greeter object given that language. Now here in test, I can say var g equals greeter.createGreeter Italian, and then I should be able to say greeter.greet like that. And so I will call this, that'll create an instance of this, and then I can call this greet function on that method, on that class, like this. So let's actually comment these out because we don't need them right now. So assuming I type that all in correctly, oh, boo, I actually have to do console.log. I did type it in correctly, just didn't type in enough. There we go. So now I'm going to run it, and I've created an instance of the class, and I can run a method on the class, and it works exactly as I'd expected. Again, this is called the factory model. There is another model for doing things where, you know, it would actually, some people want to actually sort of expose the class directly from the module. So we'll go here to our greeter module. And the way we do that is actually we replace exports. We say module.exports equals greeter like this. And what we're doing here is we're saying this whole module is in fact just this greeter class. Now what I do when I require this greeter is I sort of declare this variable as the class, and now I can just do new greeter language like that. Oopsie, let's do French this time. And now it should work exactly the same. There you go. So the functionality is effectively the same, but the model is slightly different. The first way we did it in the factory is you expose a function to create a new instance of the class, and in the second model, which is called the constructor model, I actually make the module be that class, and so whenever I require that module, I just directly instantiate that class. In all of the Node modules you're going to be using throughout your Node projects, you're going to see a pretty inconsistent mix of these two models, and it can be a little confusing, and you're always going to have to go to the documentation or the samples or the tests to sort of figure out how people, that particular module is doing it, how people coded that module up. There is definitely a trend, however, towards the the factory model to sort of expose a function to create an instance of the class. And the reason for that is largely because I might want to expose more than one class from my modules. So if the downside to this constructor module, the model as we've done it here, is I can only expose one class from my module, and you're seeing a lot of packages and modules actually want to give you access to a lot of things, so they just give you a constructor function to call instead. So we'll use the the factory model. I'm sorry, we'll be using the factory model whenever we write our own modules. So that's actually the basics here of module creation, and with that under our belts, in the next section we'll go on and look at NPM.